Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special podcast. Today we have a returning guest to the show, Charles Hugh Smith from Of Two Minds, located at of2minds.com. And I got to tell you, food price inflation is all the rage. And in many places around the world, food price inflation is even rage inducing. Now, right here in America, if other forms of inflation haven't financially killed off the masses, then it might just be food price inflation that hammers the final nail in the coffin. So, what are cities, states, and nations doing about it? And perhaps more importantly, what can we as individuals do about it? Do we just slowly drown in the abyss of hunger and malnutrition? Or do we take control of our circumstances and even turn the problems into solutions? Well, to help us chew on all of this for a while, we need somebody who understands all of these dynamics from the macro to the micro. And I personally can't think of a better person to sit down with and share a nice hot cup of analysis with than Charles Hugh Smith. So, Charles, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Thank you, Paul. I am really excited about our topic today.
I'm really excited about our topic today too, Charles. Now, Charles, the first thing I want to talk about, which is probably going to show my excitement, is this aha moment that I had. I recently had this aha moment, Charles, and it's what sparked me to reach out to you and want to talk about this and pick your brain about this, because I know you've got gardening experience. I know you got economic experience. I know you got all of this great experience that we can pick your brain with. So let me just briefly talk about this aha moment. And the crux of it is talking about backyard gardening. I'm talking about home gardening. I'm talking about growing your own food, Charles. And my aha moment was like, oh my goodness, this is like an income stream, Charles. Aha, it's like an income stream. So even though all I'm doing is growing my own food and eating it, right? I'm not growing it and selling it. I'm not at that point, right? But I'm growing some food and I'm eating it, and I had this aha moment. And let me just make a couple points on that. So, to me, I've just realized that this is actually a legitimate income stream. It's amazing. And what I mean by that is, maybe a person has like a pension, and maybe they also have a job at the same time, and maybe they have a side hustle at the same time, and they're still falling behind. They're still needing to supplement their income with something. Well, what are they going to do? Well, why not generate that income by growing food? So, finding ways to increase that income stream to me is super important. And this is like something that just clicked with me this year. I say I've been gardening for 3 years. It's really more like 3 seasons and not quite 3 years. It's like 3 summers when I really started getting into it seriously. And last year doesn't really count because I had the zombie virus for like the summer, and it was just a bad summer last year. But this is my 3rd year. And my point is that by spending less money on food because you can grow some of it in your backyard, well, that's money that you can spend elsewhere, right? That's money that I can take and buy like this silver $50 here from the 1930s, and it's like when you save money by growing your own food and eating that food, it's like a positive feedback loop. And it creates these challenges where I say oh my goodness, I want to learn how to grow more food and eat more of the food that I grow and buy less of the food in the grocery store for myself and for my family. So I'm also kicking myself, and I'm thinking why didn't I think of this sooner? Why is it taking me? Why didn't I think about this 15 years ago or 20 years ago? Why is it now just taking me now to figure this stuff out? Because it takes a long time to actually be productive in your backyard garden. And I guess what I'm asking for you, Charles, and I guess what this question and where this is leading to is can you interpret or can you extrapolate this aha moment that I have, and especially in the context of cities and states and nations and socioeconomic collapse and financial Armageddon and all that fun stuff? Just what is going on here, Charles? What is this aha moment, and does it mean anything?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does, Paul. And I think you're right. And one of my readers, I posted several years ago, he did an analysis of how much labor he put into his garden, and he was a experienced gardener, and it was a profit stream, of a couple $100 a month that he didn't have to go out and spend buying food elsewhere. So there's that it is an income stream, but it's also a health income stream, meaning that the food that you grow yourself, because you're taking care of the soil and you have more control over the inputs, it's going to be healthier than some big ag thing that's food that's been grown on soil that's been depleted, and doesn't have a lot of micronutrients. And so there's health aspects to it, and also there's also the health aspects that our immune system is built up by playing in the dirt. Essentially, that's a big part of childhood, is building immune systems by having exposure to the natural world. And so locking ourselves in air-conditioned rooms has not been beneficial to our health. Okay, in the big picture, I want to bring up a couple points. One is, back in World War II, a lot of people refer back to that, like when we had national unity and national purpose. Well, the Victory Garden was a big deal. In other words, we need more food because we've got, a huge demand on our resources for fighting the war. And so it's a national benefit for people to grow food themselves. And that, I think, is something that's still true, that we've come to depend on these big ag, very large corporations for that have concentrated, the production of food in these you could call them nodes, in a network. And so there's only a handful of slaughterhouses that do most of the animal, processing. And it used to be that there were thousands of slaughterhouses around the country, right? And you can look at various aspects of our food production and go, my gosh, there's 5 corporations that own most of this, And so that is not good, because it's not good, not just because, of some anti-corporate thing. It's just not good because when some problem occurs in one of those nodes, then the whole system is disrupted. Whereas if you have a decentralized network, then, there's always somebody else nearby that can cover for you. But if you're getting all your food from 2,000 miles away and something happens in that long chain, then you don't get any food. So it's not, we like to talk about resilience, and you used the word adaptability. And so decentralization is the way to get resilience and adaptability. So there's that issue. And then just the larger picture, as you say, is geopolitically and in the big picture, big ag, these huge global corporations, they all use a ton of energy to grow the food, right? And that's including organic, okay? Like if you take an organic tomato that's been flown in from Mexico or something, we don't know what the soil was like there in Mexico or China or these other places that are touting their organic. It's like, organic, what does that actually mean? Are they testing the soil for heavy metals? No. It's like, it just means they're not using super toxic stuff on growing that, but it doesn't mean it's healthy. And then it's all like, well, wait a minute, does that make economic sense to fly in, fruit from thousands of miles away? And it's like, we've sort of lost the picture because it's all about cost in America. Like, well, if I can buy a grape from Chile and it's cheaper than a grape from, down the road, well, then I'm going to buy the stuff that is flown in 2,000 miles. And it's all like, well, wait a minute. That makes financial sense. Like, well, it's a dime cheaper. Okay, so we're going to buy the stuff that's a dime cheaper. But is there anything else that we should be calculating other than just cost? And obviously, if you look at it as a national security issue, then you go, well, actually, it's more important that we grow our own food. Never mind that whether we saved $1 because we shipped it in from China or someplace else, right? So I think that's part of why I'm a big fan of people getting back into gardening. Is it's healthier, it's an income stream, and it's a benefiting the national resilience to have decentralized food.
Now, Charles, you bring up some interesting points, because last year, now I've got this brick of Cafe El Moro, and this is my favorite coffee in the entire world, Charles, because this comes from the Dollar Tree, and I don't even know if they have it there anymore, but I was shouting from the rooftops last fall, or I don't even remember where it was. It might have been 2020 or 20. No, it was last fall. It was when the Dollar Tree was still $1. And I was like, you need to buy as much of this coffee as you can. And I know, like, this stuff is never, ever going to go bad, right? Like, we found just recently a box from houses we had 15 years ago, of coffee, Seattle's Best. That's also vacuum sealed, and it tastes just fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So coffee like this in a vacuum brick doesn't go bad. But like, what you're saying, if it's cheaper to buy that grape from Chile, well, that works until it doesn't. And then what are you going to do if you can't get the grapes? And like in my case, like I don't know how to grow coffee, right? But I know I like drinking coffee. So to me, it was a no-brainer. I was like, you need to buy as much of this stuff for $1 as you absolutely can while it's still available. And now look, the price is $1.25 on this coffee. So that's, I don't even know where I was going with that, but that is interesting how like the whole dynamic of what is it that you're getting from other countries, and are you getting from other countries something that you normally couldn't get on your own? Because I think that's important, because if we can go grow grapes down the road like you're referring to, well, then we should be doing that, because we shouldn't be getting the grapes from Chile, because maybe that's where they grow the coffee, because I think they grow it in Colombia or something. Like Juan Valdez, isn't he from Colombia or something like that? So it's like, so that makes total sense to me. Is there anything you wanted to add on top of that? Because I think that's an interesting point that you're making.
Yeah, and let's talk about the in classic capitalism. That goes back to this economist Ricardo, right? And his whole theory of trade was that's mutually beneficial. If somebody, and also Adam Smith mentioned it too. If somebody can, like say in their country, it was England. If England can import cheap good wine from Portugal and then sell the Portuguese like some cloth that the Portuguese don't have at the same price, then it's mutually beneficial, right? So you're taking, you're importing stuff that's better and cheaper than you can make, right? So that's the theory of global trade. But in those good old days, trade was very lively, right? I mean, trade's been around for like 5,000 years. I mean, the Romans were getting stuff from India, and India was importing stuff from Rome, and so on. So what it was, though, it was all luxuries. In other words, it was kind of like, or stuff you really couldn't get. Like they couldn't get silk from any place but China, because China was very careful to protect how to make silk. So it was luxury goods more than anything. Tea and coffee and sugar became mass products because they could be grown elsewhere. But I think the difference I'm trying to make is there's luxuries and then there's essentials. Now, if you start relying on other countries for your grain and for your meat and for your essential food commodities, you're in big trouble when that goes away, right? Whereas if we lost access to one of the coffee markets and we had to buy more from someplace else, maybe the price would go up, right? And we could probably get by. But if your grain is not available, like what you're referring to now with Ukraine and Russia, ceasing exports, then your population starves to death, or starves, gets hungry, gets angry, and then overthrows the government. So, or if it's available and it's too expensive for the bottom 90%, then you also get political and social turmoil. And this is like one thing we see in history, right? That once the price of stuff goes up to where people can't afford to feed their families, they have nothing left to lose. So then they will overthrow their government or create huge social turmoil. So, and we're blessed. You are in the heartland, and we've talked in past podcasts about how you moved to the heartland specifically to get weather that you could grow food and an ample water supply. And I think this is going to be, we should talk about that too, that these places in the United States or around the world that are just, all the water is being drained out of aquifers, or it's being shipped thousands of miles through pipes and stuff like that. Or the weather's becoming so extreme, like even northern Italy is suffering drought and their agriculture is being pummeled. These are real issues, because if productive ag land goes fallow because there's not enough water or the extremes of weather, then what's going to fill that gap? And the answer is there isn't going to be anything, because we've already used all the good ag land on the planet. That's the reality. So, we're blessed here in the U.S. that we have a huge part of our nation has, at least currently, a lot of water.
And, this is interesting. Let's stay on this topic, because this is very important, because both individually and as a nation, collectively, community-wise or nation-wise, or however you want to say it, this is very important, because this is a topic I want to talk about, kind of like the importance of costs and maximizing like low cost, efficient, effective systems, right? Like with me in my garden, my one bed was here when I bought the house. And this year, this season, I've literally watered less than 5 times on that first bed. Actually, less than 5 times total. Now, through the months of May and June, I personally, through my blood, sweat, and tears, constructed 7 garden beds, Charles. 7.
Wow.
So the last 2 beds went up on one specific weekend, and those last 2 beds have probably been watered less than 3 times, maybe 3 times. So when I say I've watered less than 5 times, that's in total. And that's like 2 of those times weren't even when I had all of the beds built. So like being able to do this without using water, just relying on the rainfall, that to me is important. That's one of those considerations. And if you think about it as like income streams, well, every single income, like talking about it individually, in my case, every single individual income stream comes with a cost, right? Not saying I beg for money on street intersections, but if I wanted to, right? If I wanted that as an income stream, well, I'd have to go out and I'd have to find a piece of cardboard, right? And then I'd have to find a Sharpie and I'd have to make a sign that says like, I need gas money to get to Atlanta, or you could be like, I need boat money for a ferry back to California or something like that. So you know, you've all seen these signs. My wife left me and kicked me out of the house, and I want a cheeseburger and a beer, you know, stuff like that. So you also got to go behind the Goodwill, and you got to dumpster dive for the rejected clothes, right? Like, so there's all these costs to get an income stream going. So maximizing your time spent working in the garden, right? Like actually growing enough food for it to matter and for it to make a difference, for it to become a net income booster, and not something that like you're spending $100 to grow one single tomato on, right? Like that's not being productive. That's just having a hobby that costs you money, and you're not really helping yourself in that sense. So, you know, like my point here is that there are these costs involved with getting income streams going, with getting garden going, with getting agriculture, with anything. There is a cost involved, and the goal there is to be the most efficient and effective that you can, and to maximize those low costs. So here's my question to you, Charles. So if cities and states and nations, right, if they all have to adapt to the global revaluation, if they all have to embrace degrowth, if they all have to lower their expectations, and if we all have to lower our expectations, and if we all have to make do with less, or make more with less, or make less with more, all these buzzwords, right? There's all these buzzwords and sayings, and so like if we have to do all of these things, so here's my question: how in the world are any of our current crop of elected leaders and public servants going to do anything in any way that is the low cost, effective, efficient way of doing it? How's that going to get jump started to get that income, in this case, food production, sufficiently enough to make it beneficial? How's any of that going to happen, Charles?
Well, Paul, I love that question. It's actually a very big question, and I'm going to answer it by, like I often do, going back to history, that we've forgotten that in the 19th century, not that long ago, big cities like London and Paris, these big cities grew half of their own food within their city limits. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how was that possible? And it was like, one of my favorite anecdotes is, in one of the original Sherlock Holmes stories written in like the 1890s in London, he goes to, he takes public transport or a cab to some house where a woman has raised geese to sell for Christmas dinner. And it's a good example of how people used to grow a lot of food within cities. People had rooftop gardens, they kept a few chickens, they had a little garden, and this was normal. This was not some kind of bizarre practice, right? And so city officials could start promoting this. And there are some places in the U.S. that this is being promoted. I think Detroit is doing some major work to support, gardens. And you're in Ohio, right? And there is a lot of movement in Ohio that I've heard from other readers about farm to table and reusing empty urban lots filled with trash, and that cities can do a huge amount to boost people saying, well, why don't we're going to take over this, lot, and we're going to provide you with some compost and hook up the water, and okay, you guys organize it, you guys get a community, garden going. And there's a lot of history of that, right? I mean, I joined the first community garden in Honolulu in like 1976 or something like that, right? And so there's a lot of, it's easy to set up that blueprint. In other words, lots of cities and communities have community gardens, right? Where if you don't have any land because you live in an apartment, well, then you get like a plot. And this is really common in Europe too, England, the UK. And so there are a lot of historical models for how to do this. And we've kind of forgotten that in the, like if you go back 3 generations or so, many Americans had gardens just as standard practice. The whole idea that you didn't have a garden would have been bizarre, right? Everybody had a garden to grow stuff that was either they couldn't buy or they wanted to can, stuff for winter, et cetera, to save money, as you say. So I want to mention that, I'm always trying to learn more about gardening. Like all of us who are gardeners are always trying to learn more because, like you said, we want to boost our efficiency. And a reader recommended a book that was written in 2005. I think the title is Gardening When It Counts. And it's by a guy, I think he now lives in Tasmania, off the coast of Australia. But he's an American and he was living in Oregon and various other places. And his whole scope of the book is how to get to do a lot of work in your yard and your garden, growing good stuff with the least amount of effort and money, right? So there's a lot of other books, and I'm sure you've learned from those too. So I just want to kind of share another topic, which is we all live in different environments, right? And so some things grow easily in your environment and other things are not going to be happy there and you're going to struggle with them, right? And so you want to just find out by looking around at your neighbors and reading and talking to old folks that might still garden, what grows easily here, right? And I also want to bring up another point, which is, like we all depend on grain, right? Rice, wheat, etc. Well, those are really not very efficient. You have to, you can't grow much wheat in your backyard, right? You get like a handful. And so those are mass production kind of foods. But you look at a potato and like you compare it to wheat. Okay, wheat, you have to thresh, you have to dry it, you have to do all this stuff, you have to mill it, then you have to move it around. And it's all like, well, wait a minute. With a potato, you just wash it and you cook it and you eat it. So is it any wonder why potatoes are a huge source of basic nutrition around the world? That's just really easy to grow and it's easy to store and it's easy to cook. And so that's just an example of how, stuff can be easy to grow and easy to eat, or it can be difficult to grow and difficult to prepare. And so, if you're looking at stuff, how to save money and make it easy on yourself, then grow what grows naturally and easily in your area. And it's funny how people, the cooks and, cooking shows and chefs and, all that celebrity chef stuff, there is a movement there where you can learn from some of these people who are using stuff that was abandoned in their area. And people just stopped growing it. And now they're starting to grow it again because it's nutritious and it's easy to grow. So, and there's a lot of, so there's that too. We can learn from people going, hey, this Chinese vegetable grows really well here in the South, and we should start eating it, And so then they share a recipe and people try it and they go, hey, this isn't so bad. This tastes pretty good. Tastes like spinach. That's kind of like tastes like chicken, right? There's a lot of stuff that tastes like spinach.
Now, this sounds great, Charles, but the problem that I have is, like, it sounds like what you're talking about is giving power back to the people. And that was my point, right? Like, I don't see that happening. I don't see the government, for lack of a better term, giving the power back to the people in this way. I mean, that sounds great, but like you got to be like a rebel gardener to be able to do this kind of stuff. I mean, sometimes, if it's like supported and if it's, for lack of a better word, blessed by the government, whether it's the city and they say, okay, we're going to have these garden plots or whatever. Yes, that's good. But just in general, I think the difficulty there is you've got a government that they would rather control the food supply and say who gets to eat, what they get to eat, and how much of it they get to eat, rather than saying, hey, you should grow some fruits and vegetables in the backyards. How do you overcome that obstacle, Charles?
Well, that's a great question, Paul. And I'm working on a book right now on self-reliance, which is really my term for what we're talking about. You like adaptability, resilience, It's like, how much can you provide for yourself? And whatever you can do it, whether it's 10% or 50%, it's all to the good. That's what we're talking about, right? I think you have to move. If you're in a place where there's a lot of rigid bureaucracy and all that heavy government control like you're talking about, then you're going to have to move away, because you're not going to be able to overcome those obstacles. You're going to have to move to some place where there's less control, less bureaucracy, whether they're promoting gardening or whether they're just allowing it. That's the place you're going to, and you've moved. And that's one of the big topics that we've discussed. And I think you are, it's one of the things I like talking about with you, because you've actually done it. You've moved, and you've lived in many places on the continental US, and you've served overseas.
And I lived in Mexico.
Yeah, and so it's like you got to move to some place that has the stuff that you need, and part of that is permission to do what you need to do to take care of yourself and your family. And if you're not getting that permission where you are, then you got to move. And we're seeing that now, I think. Don't you think, Paul? Like I just saw that like California lost 300,000 people like last year or whatever. And you go, oh, well, there's still 39 million left, right? But that starts getting significant, 300,000 here, 300,000 there. Pretty soon you're talking 1 million people moving, and then pretty soon you're talking 10 million people moving. And so it's going to be, I think we're going to see that kind of migration to rural, small towns, small cities that are, if they're not promoting self-resilience, they're at least allowing it. And I think your life is actually a life lesson in that, don't you think?
I do. And it's almost like, and I appreciate you saying that, Charles, and it's almost like, from the government's point of view, it's like, first it's like resist and fight these kind of like freedom and liberty issues. And then it's like, well, if you can't beat them, join them and take advantage of it. So ultimately, we're all going to be doing this eventually. The question is, how do you get to that point? And then how much pain is the community or the city or the state or whatever going to go through until you get to that point? So I guess those are like the questions. And I guess one of them you could think about might be the marijuana legalization thing, where like some states have just embraced it and said, well, I mean, all right, people are people and we're just going to allow this. And other states haven't. And like back when Colorado was the first many years ago, I think they had a boom because of that. And it's just like, so like, yes, when you start telling people they can't collect rainwater off of the roof, or when you start telling people that, you can't grow this here, and I'm not talking about marijuana specifically, I'm just talking about like fruits or vegetables. I mean, if you got a homeowners association and, that's like my first number one priority before all other priorities with buying a house, right? There's already enough city and local ordinances. I don't need to pay extra money to a homeowners association for them to tell me what I can and can't do in my backyard, right? So it's like all of these things, and I lost my train of thought. I lost my focus. But is any of that making any kind of sense there at all, Charles?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And so we're discussing the issues. Why would somebody move? And moving is a big deal. I mean, my analogy is you're towing an iceberg, with a rope in your teeth. I mean, it's like there's just a lot to do to move, right? And then you're leaving behind friends and maybe family. I mean, it's not an easy thing to move. And here again, I look to your life experience. But if you really want to take control of your life and you're not able to do it in the place you're in, then you're going to have to go someplace else. And this is why human populations move around the world. They people who are sick and tired of being controlled or impoverished, and they don't have enough control over their lives to get out of poverty, then they want to move someplace where they have the freedom to improve their lives. And so that's kind of what we're talking about here. But I also want to ask you, what are you growing that's really successful, that you're going, wow, this is so much fun. In other words, the thing grows. I didn't have to poison a bunch of insects or anything like that. It just grows. I harvested it and my family ate it, and there's a huge satisfaction in that.
Well, thank you, Charles. I appreciate that. And I'm doing what works in my area. And actually, I'm going to show my harvest for this morning. So this is from just this morning. And I'm Excellent. So mad because something ate half of 2 of my ripest tomatoes. And yesterday I used all my ripe tomatoes. But since sometime in July, And assuming there's no natural disaster that happens in my area, my backyard specifically, we're going to be eating fresh tomatoes through the end of October. But here's my harvest for today, Charles. Now listeners can't see this, but if you want to watch on YouTube, you can see this. I'm going to show this up. And this is just your standard strainer basket for like pasta, like a plastic basket that you would like strain pasta or wash something out in. And I weighed it with the basket. This is 3 pounds and 15 ounces. So this is today. And I got this zucchini right here. This thing is beautiful. That thing's a mammoth. And I got this cucumber right here. Here's a cucumber. This thing is looking nice too. There's a little stem end and there's the blossom end on that end right there. And it's like spiky. Like cucumbers are actually spiky. They're pretty interesting. I don't know if that's a natural defense mechanism or what. And I got this green pepper. I probably shouldn't have picked it, but I wanted to show and tell today. So I got this pepper here, and I really am a big fan of growing peppers, and I should be growing more jalapenos and serranos, but I got these hot cherry peppers, and these are just the ripe ones. These are really cool. They taste sweet, but if you eat the seeds in the membrane, oh my goodness, it'll set your mouth on fire, Charles. And then my standby is tomatoes, and I'm getting really good at tomatoes. Here's a couple tomatoes. Now you're going to say these look orange, and they kind of do, but I wanted to pick them anyway. Like I said, the really red ones, something ate 2 of them last night. It drives me crazy when they do that because they like eat half of it. It's like, why didn't you just eat a whole one? Why you get like half of 2? But here's another type of tomato right here. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tomatoes today. And I got a cucumber and a zucchini and 3 peppers. And it's almost 4 pounds of actual food. And some days I don't pick anything. Some days I pick 10 pounds of stuff. I got a ton of tomatoes on the vine. And 7 of my beds are brand new. And there's a lot of challenges with that, especially with the way that I'm doing it. But yes, I'm trying to grow stuff that I can do with minimal effort, minimal input, and stuff that I actually eat, right? Like we spend money all the time on tomatoes. I don't know who doesn't like tomatoes, right? If you don't like tomatoes, there's something wrong with you because they're like, it's like, is it a vegetable? It is a fruit? I don't know. It's sweet. It's delicious. It's got great texture. It's just awesome. And then I'm getting to the point, Charles, if I can just show this too. Look at this. This is my first jar. Well, not my first jar, but part of my first batch of canned tomatoes. So now I'm like preserving my own food. It's like, oh my goodness, my mind is blown. So this is kind of like a crushed tomato, and this is like a pint. So it's literally like the size of a can of tomatoes if you're going to buy them in the store. So I'm at that point. And it's taken me 3 years to get to this point, right? And you know, we didn't move until 2017. So really it's like 5 years that when you consider where you got to move. Yeah, well, that was 5 years ago. So it's like this stuff, like if it sounds like there's a sense of urgency, it's because to get to this point right here, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of mistakes more than anything, and a lot of learning. Like my phrase for this year with my wife is, well, I'm learning, right? Why are you going to build another bed? Why are you going to build another bed? Why? My neighbor's like, how's your farm going? And I'm like, oh, that makes me feel so good when he says that. Cause like, it's not even a farm. It's like 8 beds in the backyard, but I'm like starting to figure it out and get good at it now. So I don't know what my point there was too, but I want to show you one thing real quick while I'm on it. So this right here, sooner or later, I'm going to get some chickens, but that's probably when we move out to the county and move from the nice school district. But this right here is a can of Keystone Beef, and I don't know how to raise cattle, right? So I have no business trying to learn how to raise cattle. That's not something I can do. Now, I was telling people to buy this stuff too, and I looked up my search history on Walmart, and I paid $8.28 for this can, 28 ounces. It's 2 ingredients. It's beef and salt. And you can check out this company online. I'm not sponsored or anything. This is just what I like to do because I like eating meat, right? And I want to have some stores in reserve. This lasts until October 2026. I paid $8.28 for it on October 14th of 2021. It doesn't expire until October 2026. And today at Walmart, if you want to buy it, it costs $10, $9.98. So it's like, this is like savings. And it's one of those examples of if you don't know how to raise animals or you can't do it efficiently, you don't have any business doing that stuff. You need to be growing tomatoes, you need to be growing cucumbers or whatever it is in your area that works, right? I probably don't need to be growing coffee. I probably don't need to be growing bananas, papayas, mangoes, any of that stuff, right? Citrus. Like, no, I need to be growing stuff that works in my area. And I don't know where I've gone off on a tangent again because it's so exciting talking to you, Charles. But here's another thing, right? I actually spend a non-insignificant amount of money on pickles and relishes and pickled veg. I like 4-bean salad and I like pickles and I like relish. I use it in like pasta salad and I use it in like chicken salad and tuna salad and all that stuff. So this is also something, Charles. This is my first can of like, now I didn't grow the onions. I'm trying to go onions. I'm failing at it pretty much this year. It's the first time I ever tried it. I didn't grow the garlic, and obviously I didn't grow the spices, or the vinegar, but like this is like my squash and my zucchini and my cucumbers that are in here, and these are like a delicious pickled vegetable that I'm going to be able to eat. So it's not just growing what grows in your area, but it's what do you like to eat? What do you eat on a regular basis, and what do you eat a lot of? And this brine has a little bit of salt in it. It's got some sugar in it, so it's nutrient. It's not just like eating a dill pickle that has nothing, right, and is mass produced. No, this is picked at the peak of freshness or whatever it is that the people like to talk about in their marketing departments. And yeah, that's true, right? Like this is peaked in the peak of freshness and has maximum nutrition value. So I don't know where I was going with all of that stuff either, Charles. But those are my points with that, right? You got to do what makes sense. Your own coffee, even though I like to drink it, doesn't make sense for me. Raising cattle, doesn't make sense for me. Now, I would love to be able to eat some rabbits, and I'm going to eat some rabbits one day, but I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed to shoot them in my backyard right now, so I'm not going to do that while I'm here. But like that's another thing, right? Like, and there's a river by me, and if I was any good at fishing, then I'd be eating fish out of the river down there. So like all of these things, like these income streams, if you can get to the point where little by little, well, sooner or later, it's going to start going exponential on your growth. And then it's going to be like what's actually something that is useful in your life on that scale. And this is something that anybody can do, right? Like you were talking about, if you live in an apartment, well, go get like a community garden lot if they have it in your area. And if they don't, we'll move and figure out your life situation. But if you make $200,000 a year, okay, if you don't think $500 a year in produce is worthwhile or $1,000, well, grow $50,000 worth of produce if that's what you want to do, because you can scale it up like that, right? Like it's infinite what you can do and what the opportunities and possibilities are. So did any of that make any sense at all, or is there anything you wanted to add on top of that, Charles?
No, I'm real excited, Paul, by your pickles too, because now again, we go back to our roots. Now, I don't care what ethnicity you are, right? Because there's deep roots in the African American community, the Hispanic community, the Asian American communities, and in the European, Caucasian traditions, and like in other words, Germany, why do they eat pickles? Well, because it freezes in winter, and so you pickle your fresh stuff, and so pickles are a big part of the diet in Asia and Europe for a good reason, and so I guess what I'm saying is we can learn so much by looking back at the way that people lived without using huge amounts of oil and coal and natural gas, right? And so right now, I read somewhere that I think there's a tablespoon of oil in every tomato, like that you're getting at the market, right? I mean, it took a tablespoon of oil or equivalent to grow the thing and then ship it and all this other stuff. So it's we're eating, fossil fuels or hydrocarbons, right? That's basically the modern food supply. And it's like, is that really a good way to go? And we're talking about, no, it's not, for a lot of different reasons. Like, I'll tell you a little quick tale. I love your tomatoes. I just made, I want to make 2 points. One is when you grow your own food, not only is it a lot healthier for you, but you get access to like really high quality food that you can make all the fanciest food on earth. Like I just made like off an Italian cookbook, a classic, tomato soup, you whiz it up just like you did. And then, you fry some onions and actually you roast your tomatoes first. And then you roast it with some onions and garlic. It was the most unbelievably good tomato soup I've ever had. And I am sure that it beats the pants off anything in some fancy restaurant in New York or San Francisco, because it's like, like you said, picked perfect. And then with really pretty simple culinary skills, you can make really good tasting stuff. And your pickles made my mouth water, man. Pickles, I mean, that's like, it's fantastic. So I want to also mention about health, right? Is that, Americans, if you look at, like a lot of people do, they look at Mary Tyler Moore show or something like, TV in the 60s, and everybody was skinny. Everybody was thin. It was rare to see somebody who was overweight. And something happened in the 1980s where Americans started to get, overweight, and then they started to develop all these chronic illnesses, right? And so the thing about gardening is, number one, you're getting out there and you're getting physical effort, right? You're getting out in the world, and so you're getting a little fitness there, because you're working. And then you're able to eat better because you don't have to go, oh, well, I can't buy this because it's too expensive, right? And then you're also hate to waste your own food. Like Americans waste something like 40% of the food, right? And so if you, like you said, when you grow it yourself, it's like, oh gosh, why did something eat my tomato? You become like much more aware of the preciousness of food, and so you don't just like let it rot and throw it away. You find ways to use it. The other point I want to make is one of the things that most impressed me about big ag, the way that we eat in America, where big ag grows all this stuff in these depleted fields, and then they hit it with, nitrogen and other fertilizers, but it's got the soil's dead. One time my wife and I were driving through the northern Central Valley in California, right? Grows a lot of vegetables. And so the field had been cleared, and there was a lot of Roma tomatoes laying on the side of the road, that it had fallen off the bin that it had been harvested in. So we picked up these tomatoes, and they were like, they obviously were like still hard, even though they were red. We took some home, and I set it on the counter, and waiting for it to rot like a good tomato would. It just sat there for weeks, and it was tasteless, even when it was so-called ripe. It had no nutrients, or very minimal, right? Because I looked out at the field, nothing was growing in it, no weeds or anything. It was like dead. And that's the soil that so much of American food is grown on. It's not, nobody's paying anybody to grow healthy food. They're paid to grow it as fast and cheap as possible. And so what do you get? You get stuff grown on soil that there's no nutrients in it, no micronutrients. And so and I read a study, there was a USDA study that the nutritional value of our food has fallen by at least a third. And this was actually from the 2005 era. So it's probably declined even further. So, and I don't want to sound like a health nut, but it's just common sense. If you control your own garden, you're going to have healthier food, and that's going to benefit, your family money-wise and health-wise. So it's all like, okay, win-win, and then it's a win for your region too, right? I mean, if a region is growing its own food, then it's not going to be so dependent on stuff trucked in from thousands of miles away.
And there's nothing like one of my favorite things to eat in the world. And I don't know if this is because when I was a little kid in West by God, Virginia, I used to, eat tomatoes like they were apples, right? And sprinkle a little like seasoning on it. But like slicing up a tomato, and I also like slice up a tomato and sprinkle like some salt and pepper on it. It's like the most delicious thing. It's like sweet, it's juicy. You can tell there's nutrition in there. I mean, it just tastes like there's loads of nutrition in it. So yeah, it's amazing. It is amazing. And I do agree with everything that you're saying there, Charles. And what I want to do now is just swing it back to this topic of income and savings, because I want to drill on this a little bit longer, Charles. This is especially important for gold and silver investors, and any investor really, if you think about it. But like, this is especially important for gold and silver investors because everybody talks about like when to buy gold and silver, or what to buy, or when to sell, but no one ever talks about how to keep your gold and silver, right? Like that's the most important thing about all of this, is how to keep it and not have to sell it, right? That's like the important thing. That's like your savings. That's your wealth. That's your preservation right there. And so food is like income, and now this is actually like savings. So now this is like a form of wealth. But so what I wanted to say is like in an inflationary environment, it's critical to not have to tap into those savings, right? Like if stuff is inflating and you can't keep up, you don't want to have to sell your gold and silver now. That's not the time you want to have to sell it. You want to be able to hold on to that, right? And so generating this additional income is very important in that sense. And when I say income, again, I'm not saying I'm growing it and selling it at the farmer's market. That's an option. That's something that people can do if they want. And I would definitely support that and say, oh, do you. But I'm not at that point. I mean, maybe one day I will be, and I'm sure I will be. But it's very important to be able to generate the income to not have to tap into those savings. And on top of that, after 3 years, now I'm able to generate that income and convert some of it into savings. Yesterday, I made 6.5 pints of that crushed tomato. So So that's my point there. My point there is it's really critical to have income to not have to deplete your savings in that sense, especially in an inflationary environment. Then the other thing about food is like, just like gold and silver, it's like the ultimate in like privacy and simplicity. And those things are very, very, very important. And the other thing, now this is not to talk about taxes or a tax tangent or anything like that. I know you've written about this. I can say that I know that like the last thing a person wants to have is tax problems. And if you have tax problems, you need to take care of that immediately because you do not want to have tax problems because it's a burden, it's a time waste, it's a headache causer, all sorts of things. But the cool thing about growing food in your backyard is like, that's like non-reportable income, right? Like you don't have to declare that tomato plant on your taxes, right? The same way that someone who puts some peonies out in front, they don't declare that on their taxes. Or someone who buys a basket of spring flowers and puts it on their porch. And it drives me crazy because like people spend all this money on like all these spring flowers and they put all these like, I mean, they're useful, but like they put all of these ornamental, beautiful looking spring flowers in their front yard, spending all this money. And then they're spending all this money to spray the insects that the flowers attract. It's like, what is going on? These people are crazy around me. But I just wanted to hit that point again about the importance of the income in managing and maintaining your savings to make it through difficult times. And it's non-reportable in that sense. If I sell something on eBay as a side hustle, I got to report that. Even though I paid for it and I sold it at a loss, Uncle Stam still wants me to explain all that stuff. Right. So like makes no sense. I bought this computer I bought my phone for $50 and I broke it and I got a new phone. I bought my phone for $700 and it's broken and I now have a new phone. So I'm selling my cracked screen broken phone for $300 and the government thinks that's income, right? Well, I'm just saying all of this growing your own food in your backyard bypasses all that stuff, which is another reason why you're not going to get from the top down, hey, start growing some more food because they're not making money off of you growing food in your backyard also. So I guess just a question, and we're circling back here, but that's okay. But the question, like in the context of like the core versus the periphery, or in the context of like top-down central planning versus freedom and liberty, or maybe in the context of like challenges to industrial scale agriculture, right? So like, what are your thoughts on income and savings in general and economic and financial survivability and adaptability specifically? Like, is any of that stuff that I'm saying there make sense? And do you have anything you would add on to that or help me to understand it better, Charles?
Well, I don't know if I can add anything, but I think you've done you summarized, my personal philosophy really well, which I call self-reliance, right? And there's a famous essay by, the American philosopher, right? Emerson. He wrote this essay in the 1840s called Self-Reliance, and he was talking about thinking for yourself. But he didn't talk about the kind of self-reliance that we're talking about, like growing your own food, because everybody grew their own food in 1845. It was just like, well, why would you not be self-reliant in terms of your physical wants and needs, right? And so I think what I would add is, thinking for yourself, being independent in thought, making your own assessment and decisions about your life. That's like a key part of what we're talking about, and gardening and growing your own food is part of that, just like owning precious metals. It's like you've thought it out yourself. You're not just going to listen to the pundits or whatever. You're going to take care of being responsible for your own life and self. And so that's what we're talking about, is how do you express that in the real world? Like we can talk about it as an abstraction until, we're blue in the face. And so growing your own food is like making all this real, and it gives a certain satisfaction that you've taken control of some part of your life that you used to just be passive and dependent on these larger forces that you don't control. And I want to add that, all these levels of government control and bureaucracy that we're talking about, they're really expensive, right? And what I see happening is all those places in the US that spend huge amounts of money, controlling everybody and monitoring this and demanding compliance, and you got to fill out 14 sheets of paper to, to get a permit to fix your chimney or whatever. It's like all that stuff's going to go away because we're simply not going to have enough resources and money to support that kind of bureaucracy, right? It just doesn't make any sense. It was all worthless anyway. I mean, there are some good things about, safety, right? You want to make sure that work done around utilities is done safely and so on. I'm not saying that no regulation is a good thing, but the regulation should make sense. So like you said, when you're in a place where they say, well, you can't put up a clothesline, and let the sun dry your clothes, it's all like, no, that does not make any sense. We're sorry. You can't grow any food in your front yard. No, that does not make any sense, right? You should be able to do whatever you want, and they should be encouraging you to grow food in your front yard, not telling you can't do it. So I think we're going to have to start looking at those at places that allow you to become self-reliant, not self-sufficient. That's impossible. Like you said, we all can't raise cattle and we can't all have rabbits or chickens, but the food that you do grow, you can trade with other people. I want to mention that too. I myself, some people love harvesting wild food. Well, people give us that. We give them some of what we grow. Some people have extra eggs, because they have a lot of chickens. Well, okay, then maybe they can use something we've grown. And so you start meeting people who are growing food and raising meat, and then they are usually willing to take something you've got in surplus, and then they'll give you a surplus of what they have. And so, and all of that is not a taxable thing either. You're just trading a few things with neighbors,
Being generous, right? Is like the old school original, like this is what a support system is supposed to be, right?
That's
right.
Right.
Like throughout all of history, the support system has been the family. And then beyond the family, it's been the community, which you can call it what you want, like a community, a club, a group, a church, like there's lots of forms of community. But now for some reason it's like you got yourself, and if you can't, well, it's the government. It's like, wait a second, what happened to all these other things? And it's like they don't matter anymore, I guess. But
exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And we're going to have to go back to that, in my view. You're going to have to find and or help or contribute to a real community, not just passively hope the government's going to give you, food, energy, money, et cetera, because that's not going to work in an era of scarcity.
Now, Charles, now you've been writing a lot about eggs lately, and it's great. And for any viewers and listeners out there who are not reading Charles's articles, and every single one of them, and I do mean that, you really need to, because I've learned so much through you over the years reading your articles, and they're very entertaining and informative and all sorts of good stuff. You don't always get it right though, so let me caveat that. But here's my point. So you've been writing a lot about eggs lately, and one of the things you wrote was when you put too many eggs in one basket. But I want to go back to something else you wrote even a couple weeks ago. And you said this. You said, how much gold will you trade for a few eggs? It all depends on how hungry you are. And this is great because I'm going to open up a can of worms here, Charles. And the first thing I want to do is just show you this coin. This is the smallest gold coin I have. And you probably can't even see this, but this is a 2 peso Mexican gold coin from and I can't even see it. I need my magnifying glass. From 1945 series. This is a 2 peso gold coin. So just like Americans, right? Your average Mexican used to walk around. This is smaller than a US dime, right? It's tiny. It weighs 0.0486 or something like that ounces. So it's not even it's half of a tenth of an ounce, basically, of gold is what this is. And it's interesting because this was 2 pesos back in 1945. Today, $1 will get you 20 pesos. And I actually looked at La Comercial Mexicana, which is like a Kroger or an Aldi's or an Albertsons or a Walmart or something like that in Mexico, where you can buy groceries. And I looked just today, the cost of 18 eggs, for simplicity's sake, on their website is 50 pesos. So if you want to translate and convert to dollars, that's 36 eggs today, right now in Mexico, is 100 pesos or $5 US. And this is 2 pesos right here. And this coin, actually, if you can find it, which you probably can't, is about $150 today, right now. That's not what I wanted to get into with all of this stuff. Here's what I want to get into with all this stuff. And I hope I'm not opening up a can of worms. And if I am, hopefully you still got some energy left. But is that the right question? Is how much gold will you trade for a few eggs? Is that the right question, Charles? Because in my mind, right, see, it's more of like, how much gold or silver and I'm going to add silver here, right? To me, it's not a choice. It's gold and silver, and that's the only money. But to me, the question is, how much gold or silver must you trade for a few eggs? And let me explain this, Charles. Let me explain this. So to me, the point is that gold and silver are the only real, decentralized, universal unit of measure money. For example, if I was going to say, how fast can you run a mile, right? I'm not asking you to reinvent a timekeeping system and explain it in a way that I can kind of sort of understand it, right? I'm asking you a specific number of minutes and seconds. For example, half dollar can run a mile in 3 minutes and 42 seconds, right? That's what I want to know. Or if I say, how tall is your son, right? I'm not asking you to come up with a new system of measuring height, right? I'm asking you specifically, how many feet and inches is that, right? Like half dollar son is 6'5". Now, if you're a weirdo, you use that metric system, whatever the heck that thing is, you could be like, half dollar son is 2 meters tall, right? But that's the point, right? Like there's this established scientific fixed measure for time and for distance. So when we ask how much do a few eggs cost, and in Mexico it costs 50 pesos for 36 of them. When we ask how much a few, and I would not sell this gold coin for a few eggs, which is why I'm learning how to grow my own food, and I'm gonna eventually have chickens, so I don't even have to do that. So I get more gold coins, right? Because by growing my own food, not every 20 pounds of produce, if it's $1 a pound, then that's like a silver coin that I can save for the future. So that's one of my points there. And the point is, so when we ask how much a few eggs cost, throughout all of time, in my mind, the only thing that stands the test of time every time throughout all of history and all the history that's to come, well, the answer is a specific weight and purity of gold or silver. That's how much the eggs cost. That's the measure, right? That's what you get with, that's what you use for the money. And I'm probably not even explaining it that well because I don't explain things that well. But I guess my question to you, Charles, is what am I missing about money here? Like is not gold and silver like just gold and silver the real money out there? I mean, just like we agree upon what time is and what distance is, to me it's the same thing when we talk about what money is and what money isn't. So did you have anything you wanted to add on there? I don't want to open up a new can of worms because we're closer to the end of our conversation than the start of it, but what would you say in response to that, Charles?
Well, I think you make a very good point, Paul, and as you can probably anticipate, I threw that line in about golden eggs, kind of as a teaser, but it is true that in the gold rush, then in the early years, there was just an abundance of gold and a shortage of food. And so because nobody was growing food, everyone had a pickaxe and a pan, right? And so I think my point is, and it doesn't invalidate what you're saying, my point was, whatever is abundant now doesn't have any value once it gets down to like if there's a scarcity of essentials. And so gold and silver are not abundant now, right? They are scarce. But money, other kinds of money are abundant, right? Because it's being created by credit or, whatever. That kind of whatever's in abundance is going to not have any value when it goes to being traded for what's really scarce. And so you can call it hyperinflation. I don't think that's really the right word. I think what I mean is whatever you can create in endless amounts, like fiat money or credit, is not going to have any value when it comes to like, well, how much is somebody going to part with their eggs? Do they want to part with it for something that's going to the value could fall by 90% tomorrow? Or do they want to part with it for something that's useful to them? And what's ultimately useful is some other kind of food that they don't have. So that was my point, is that whatever is abundant now, it doesn't mean it's going to have value in the future when things are really get scarce, right? And so I guess in 1850 California, gold was abundant, right? More abundant than eggs. That was a historical rarity, which of course that's the sort of teaser part of my saying. But of course, gold and silver are not abundant now; they're scarce, and so they're not going to lose value. But I think my point was to make people start thinking about what's really valuable when you're hungry, And this is to go back to my point. The Bastille was torn down in Paris on the very day that bread skyrocketed to some record in France at that time. In other words, bread was really scarce, and that made people so angry that they were hungry that they tore down this prison, and that was part of what launched the whole French Revolution, which, as we know, was terribly destructive. And so the potential for what people will do when they don't have enough food or it's unaffordable is like significant. And so that's really what we're talking about here. What is abundant, what is scarce, and like food is inherently scarce. It's not that easy to grow. It takes a lot of energy, fertilizer, effort. It's like, no, food is always going to be scarce because it's not that easy to get food, and so just like gold and silver are inherently scarce because it takes a huge amount of effort and work and energy to dig it out and process it, right? So food is like food is like gold and silver in the sense that it's inherently scarce. And so the more that we provide ourselves, the more value we're creating. Never mind what the cost is in fiat currency. It's like, look at the value beyond whatever the fiat measure is. And it's all like, wow, it's an asset that you control, an income stream you control. And my whole thing is control everything you can in your life, right? Own your work. Don't give it away or let other people control, what happens to you. Don't make your life dependent on other people's decisions, And so when I look at your canned tomatoes, I'm going, that's a kind of freedom because, you don't need anybody's permission to eat that later in winter. And you don't, yeah.
Very, very interesting points, Charles. Very interesting. And yes, one day we're going to have to talk about money, and because I also want to argue with you about your whole labor thing, because that drives me crazy every time I hear you talk about that. But we don't have time to get into that today. We'll get into that someday soon. I promise. We will. And I hope you will join me because that's going to be a fun-spirited debate. That's going to be great. But let's just move on to the last question here, Charles, and that's just as I always conclude podcasts with, is just kind of like what's on your what are you doing moving through summer and through fall? Because a lot of people are talking about continuing supply chain disruptions. Some people are talking about famine and global starvation. Some people are talking about civil unrest and rioting in the streets and stuff. People are talking about all of these food security issues, and I'm not letting any of that stuff bother me anymore, like at that kind of a level, because, I can't do anything about that. I can't let it bother me. Why am I going to stress out about this stuff anymore? I'm just trying to do what I can to adapt and then hopefully survive and thrive in this unfolding chaos that we see all around us. So that's what I'm trying to do. So to be specific, like I got these are yellow wax bean. It's kind of like a green bean, and it's a bush bean. So it's not a pole bean. So I don't have to buy any bamboo sticks at the Hobby Lobby and stake it up, or all this stuff that these YouTube expert gardeners talk about. I do completely wrong. This is just some of the crappiest topsoil in the world, and it's growing in there. These are beautiful starts, and I got probably 30 or 40 of these individual bean plants, and I'm all the parts of my beds that have failed. These are going in there probably next week as soon as we get over this 90-degree weather, and hopefully come August, this is like a 55-day, 60-day variety. So early October, end of September, I'm going to be processing bush beans, and I've never grown from a seed before. I've done all transplants. So this is I'm super excited about this. But my point there is, as we move through summer and through fall, that's what's on my radar, right? Now I'm going to try and start growing some yellow wax beans. Hopefully the potatoes that I have that aren't doing too well, because it's the first time I've ever done it, I'll be digging those up. So I can't wait for that either. Got some onions. I don't know. We'll talk about that some other time. But, lots of failures in my garden, lots of failures. But that's okay, because next year's going to be awesome. But that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm focused on. I'm just hitting it hard with the food production. This year is all about learning. And that's what I keep telling my wife, and it drives me crazy. And sometimes I get to the brink of I'm quitting. I give up on this garden stuff. And then other times I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing in the world. It's like a roller coaster, and it's a whole season long of this roller coaster. So again, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to grow these yellow wax beans here. And I think I'm going to be successful. You got these roots coming out. I probably need to uppot this. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't know. My goal is to keep this plant alive and then to eat it when it's time to eat it. And I don't want to talk about what I'm looking forward to. I want to talk about what you're looking forward to and what you're doing over this summer and over the fall this year. So, what is Charles Hugh Smith focused on most right now? What are you doing? What's coming down the pipeline? And share some of that stuff with our viewers and our listeners, Charles.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul. And I have to say, I'm pretty similar to where you're at. Is I have kind of lost interest in a lot of these macro issues that people want to go on and on about because I don't control it, and I don't think anybody controls it. And so, I think my focus is on self-reliance. I'm writing this little book about it because I think that's going to be the future. Take control of your life, get as much control over your own life and assets and work as you can, and reduce your dependency on global supply chains. Now we can't get it to zero, right? Because we're not forging tools ourselves, and we don't have an oil well in the backyard. But if you can reduce your dependence, then it's my kind of mantra is, if you only need 10 gallons of gas a month to do whatever you're going to do, that's a lot easier to get than 100 gallons. So that's an example. It's kind of like if you need to get a little bit of food that you don't grow, then that's a lot easier than saying I need to get every tiny bite of food I have from somebody else. So that's my focus. And I want to say I think beans. I'm thrilled you're trying, and I myself have failed at getting onions. Now I'm trying a new seed. I'm going to try another seed. Beans, I had kind of poor success, but I found that the Asian long beans do pretty well for me, and the northeaster pole beans. Those just they don't get eaten by bugs, and it's all like, okay, so you just keep trying and see what works. And I think that's a good. I wonder if we've lost that element in our life, that we expect comfort and convenience and security without any experimentation or growth. And what you're talking about is personal growth, and you're building your human capital, your own knowledge, and you're building your physical capital, like your garden, And so it's like that to me is like win-win. That's the way we should all be going, and we're going to be forced to go that way. So those of us with a head start are going to have an easier life, and we'll have more to share with other people who are still totally dependent on 1,000, 2,000 mile supply chains, and they don't supply anything essential for themselves. And that's going to be tough as these scarcities, I think, increase, not decrease. That's over, and a lot of other people make a stronger case for that than I can. But globalization is ending, and financialization is unraveling. Those were the two things that made everything cheap and abundant. So they're not going to be cheap, and they're not going to be abundant, because those two drivers are unraveling, and they're unraveling faster than everybody seems to think.
Well, there you go, folks. You can wallow in the macro, and you can, get all depressed about it and say, oh, what are we going to do? This is terrible. Or you can just go outside and do something about it. And that's what Charles Hugh Smith is doing about it. And that's what I'm trying to do about it. And that's what we're all getting really excited about. And at the end of the day, maybe you can even take some of those profits and buy some gold and silver with it, because that's what I'm going to do every single time. Charles Hugh Smith, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Thank you, Paul. It was a great discussion. I hope the listeners and viewers get something out of it.